Our guest tonight spent 20 years in Congress as a representative from Ohio. And he was at the center of probably one of the most difficult, highly publicized Senate races in the country. It was a hard-fought race. He was the Democratic nominee, and he was defeated by his opponent. But not only did he run for the Senate, but he also ran for president 2 years before that. He is an author. He has fought hard for working people, for unions, for the efforts to reduce income inequality in this country. And tonight we're going to talk a little bit about the future of democracy, about politics, about the political divide.
Lighthearted topics.
Yes, absolutely. Please welcome Congressman Tim Ryan.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Thank you.
I asked you when we came in, what's it feel like not to be in Washington after 20 years?
Yeah, liberated.
Yeah?
Yeah, it's been great. I mean, really, because people like, you lost your race, and how do you feel? And they're like you died or something, you know. And it's really been kind of liberating. I mean, I got into the state Senate when I was 27, ran for Congress 2 years later, 29, spent my entire 30s, my entire 40s, I'll be 50 in July, in public life. And I've got, 20-year-old, 19-year-old, 8-year-old. I'm coaching 8-year-old basketball. Like, I'm assistant to the assistant to the assistant of the basketball coaching staff. And I'm like loving life. I'm like very content, very happy, and, pretty much stress-free. It's been nice.
Well, we could talk about whether or not you want to run again for any office. But let me just talk, if I can, take you back to the night in November when you conceded. And you said that night it was a privilege to concede. Mm-hmm. In that speech, you said, we have too much hate, too much anger, fear, and division in this country, and we need more love and compassion. We need forgiveness, grace, reconciliation. We need to leave the age of stupidity behind us. What is the age of stupidity, and how long has it been around?
I don't know. I don't remember when it started. Just the insanity, the craziness, the constant conflict. And politics is always conflict. And I'm not like Pollyanna. I've been in the game for a long time. But the level of where you're searching out always points of disagreement to have really big fights over, and I have to hate you. I have to want to vanquish you. And I have to destroy you. I think that's a fairly. It started. I think came up with, talk radio with Bill Clinton, then 24-hour cable news, and slowly got worse. Tea Party in 10 was like a monumental step down the road of insanity, and then. I think when Trump got elected, it became, I have to destroy you. And there were no rules and no boundaries. And then I think it kind of, I don't know if it peaked, I hope it peaked, but on January 6th, we had an insurrection, and then you had people say that it didn't really happen, and then just swept it under the rug. That to me is the age of stupidity. And the fact that I think that's kind of the political part. And then bigger than that, much bigger than that, is the fact that we're having really stupid conversations when the problems are so immense. Like, the challenges are so great. And it's climate, it's income inequality, it's racial justice, it's all of these things. It's our relationship and competition with China, it's energy. It's like all of these it's trauma with kids, it's deaths of despair, it's mental health issues, it's our industrial food system, like huge problems that have all kind of came to a head, and we're talking about Dr. Seuss. We're talking about SpongeBob, That's the age of stupidity.
You're a little unhappy with the Democratic Party, to say the least.
Yeah, most days.
Can you explain your criticisms? Because you were pretty tough on the party during this race,
Yeah.
right?
I'm a Democrat. I mean, I'm a staunch, loyal Democrat, have been my whole life, and, will never change my party affiliation or, there's none of that. I am frustrated that the Democratic Party that I grew up knowing, understanding, has lost its focus on the economic issues facing the vast majority of the people in the country.
You say that should be the primary focus. So what has the party been focused on that it shouldn't, in your opinion?
Well, let me first say, too, because I get this a lot. It's like, Tim Ryan, here he comes. He's for the white working class guy and, that kind of thing. And I try to correct people. I'm like, I'm for the working class. White, black, brown, gay, straight. If you're out there busting your rear end and you can't get ahead, I'm for you. So it doesn't matter to me, even Republicans, independents, doesn't matter. Like, the working class, I think, has been forgotten. And I think it happens. Like, I think President Biden, there could be points of disagreement, but the infrastructure bill, the CHIPS Act, which is landing huge chip manufacturers in places like Ohio, Intel has announced this huge project, going to be tens of thousands of really good paying jobs. The rescue package, the Inflation Reduction Act, are going to finally create an industrial policy in the United States. That was passed primarily and pushed by Democrats. Now, the infrastructure bill and the CHIPS Act had some Republican support, which I thought was really important. But we finally have an industrial policy. My criticism of the Democrats is that you'll get very, very extreme folks on the other side. They'll throw up a trope. They'll throw up critical race theory. They'll throw up something. And the Democrats will get in an argument about that, right? And I was teasing the kids today when I was, kids. I'm going to be 50. I can call you kids if I want. I was telling the students that they would throw this up, and the Democrats, for CRT, for example, Democrats would say, well, CRT is really a class for college students or master's degree students, and they would go right down the rabbit hole of this thing that someone just threw up, and we're going to have an argument and prove how smart we are and debate that point. When the people in the factory in Youngstown don't even know what the hell you're talking about. And they're like, these people are having these fights about all of these things that have nothing to do with me. And I just want to make a point real quick, because I want to be very, very clear about this. I've not changed my positions. I have, progressive credentials and all the rest. But if you walk into a room, and I would say probably in many places in Tennessee like you would in Ohio, if you walk into most rooms, you're going to talk to people where the top 5 to 10 issues on their minds, okay, are their job, the wages with their job security, the health care that's provided for their jobs, the pensions, the security of their local community. All of these things are surrounding the economic situation that that family is in. And so if a candidate, a politician, comes in and talks about any other issue, you're already at like 7, 8, or 9 on their list of views. They may even agree with you on 7, 8, 9, and 10, or 8, 9, 10, and 11, or whatever they may be. But they're going to think you don't understand them, because you're not talking about the things that are on their minds. And it's not, like I said, it's not just white people. It's Americans of all shapes and sizes, of all colors, who are struggling economically. And I think my beef with the party has been in the last few years is that we have forgotten to talk to those people about the issues that are really important
So
to them.
don't talk about critical race theory. Don't talk about abortion?
No, I think some of the things you like, the critical race theory, I mean, in some of these other things, you have to like deflect and get back on to the important economic message. My suggestion, as we were talking today, and as I talked about abortion, which is obviously a huge issue, talk about it in the context of freedom. This is an issue of freedom. Talk about it up here. You know, I mean, there's the great, one of Jimmy Carter's aides used to say that the Democrats show up to a gunfight with a 10-point policy plan. And they said that in the 70s, and we're still kind of, so yeah, an issue around women's reproductive health, talk about it in the context of freedom. Government intervention should not be. The woman should have a choice. She's a free citizen in the United States of America. And then talk about it in the context of an economic situation too. So all of these issues, talk about them in a way that you're not down in the weeds and you don't entertain some of the craziness. Stay focused on the economic issues.
So as a political observer, a political expert, what would you say about Governor DeSantis in Florida's focus on issues like critical race theory, like transgender care, like, I mean, you named banning books.
Yeah.
He seems to have done it with pretty good success. I think he was quoted this week as saying the Democratic Party is a dead, rotten carcass on the wide of the road in Florida. So that's working for him, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, to some extent. I think, obviously, we need to be the party that is sticking up for people that are getting picked on. Like, there should be no segment of our society where you aren't equal under the law, where you aren't protected, where the local community can't honor and respect with regard to transgender, these kind of things. Like, how do we deal with these vulnerable kids? That's the right thing to do. Like, not pick on them like a bully, which obviously he is. Stand tall, stand firm, defend the folks that need defended, and get back on your economic message. Like, why is DeSantis talking about all this stuff? Don't we need jobs in Florida? Don't we want to rebuild the middle class in Florida? We're driving away investment. We're going to drive out Disney, the largest, employer in the state. I don't know if it is or not. I just made it up, but I think it's got to be pretty high, right? Mm-hmm. Like, why is he doing that? Like, what's his agenda? My agenda's for you. And I think it's easy when these guys, because they're going so far out there, just ding them and get back to the message, which is we care more about the working class than you do. I
know you've been around campus today, and you know that the Unity Project, and you've heard it probably many times today, is focused on conversations, civil conversations, based on science, on the data, on facts.
So refreshing.
You mentioned misinformation and lies. How do you fight that? How do you fight misinformation and untruth?
It's hard. I mean, it's really, really hard today. There's no Walter Cronkite telling us what's true and what's not. And so it becomes difficult. I think, my wife says this, who's a 20-year school teacher. I think this is like a criticism of our civics education in the country that allows this kind of misinformation to fly. I'm stunned at the number of people who get their political news from TikTok. It's unreal. And it's not balanced, and it's just, more commentary. So it's really, really difficult. I think the problem is that we are not, and I say this as a Democrat, we are not connecting emotionally to the voters. And when you don't connect emotionally, then people are susceptible to all of this misinformation because they don't trust anybody. And I think that's the underlying problem, is that there's not a lot of trust for a leader to come out and say, that's bullshit. Like, no. Normally, if Ronald Reagan came out and said that, you would believe it. But, at the end of the day, we've lost that trust. And that's the underlying, the trust, not to get too deep and philosophical, but I guess that's why we're here, but the lack of trust and the disconnection between us, as citizens to each other, between our leaders. Like, there's just not the connection that there used to be. And I will say this, the person who did connect to the working class was Donald Trump. He talked like them. He ate taco bowls. He went to fast food restaurants. He swore in public, which I don't know if you noticed, but a lot of people swear in America. And they were running ads against him for swearing. And like in Youngstown, Ohio, I'm like, that's not an attack ad in Youngstown, Ohio. That's like that's an advertisement in Youngstown, Ohio. And so like he connected. And I was telling the kids today, there's this principle in the art of war, it's called orthodox to extraordinary. And you meet people as a leader in the orthodox. You meet them where they are. And then you lead them to the extraordinary. Yeah. But you meet them with an emotion, in an emotional way. And so Trump met people in an emotional way, and certainly didn't take anybody to the extraordinary. He took us to a very dark place as a country. But you look at the great leaders, you look at Reagan, you look at John Kennedy, you look at Bobby Kennedy, you look at Roosevelt, they connected emotionally to people. And so when they said something, it carried weight, it carried authority. Kennedy steps up, a little late for some people, but he stepped up on civil rights, and he led, right? And Roosevelt, obviously, during the war. These leaders, in Reagan, too, through the space shuttle and taking on the Soviet Union, and it's like Rocky Balboa and Rocky IV against Ivan Drago, and Ronald Reagan taking on the Soviet Union. It was like strong leaders that connected emotionally, that could say something. Now, it's a different world with technology and the decentralized media that we have today. But that emotional connection is human, and I think in a lot of ways we've lost it. But Trump came up and connected to those workers in my community who were looking for somebody.
And lost.
Barely.
Right. So,
I mean, here's a guy impeached twice. This is kind of to the point. Guy's impeached twice, didn't really accomplish anything other than a tax cut. Right? Had infrastructure week for 108 weeks in a row. And he barely got beat. And this is my criticism to the Democrats, too. Not a criticism. It's like a family discussion out of love. It's like we lost the House, barely held on to the Senate, and we barely beat people who were fascists. And it's like you got people sitting around drinking coffee saying, so are we going to vote for the Democrats? Or are we going to vote for the fascists? And the fact that people are actually having that discussion, we should reflect on that to say, maybe we need to reevaluate what we're doing here.
And according to you, maybe we should rethink Joe Biden running for president.
I do think we need a generational change. I think we, in both parties, quite frankly. I think we've been having, anybody's watched the Ken Burns documentary on Vietnam. It's like we are literally having the same arguments, the same cultural rifts that we had since the Vietnam War. And I'm like, I was born in 1973 when the war ended. So my entire life, we've been fighting on these culture wars. And I just think the only way to get out of that, one step is to elect a new generation of leadership.
So Biden's too old.
It can't be.
You think he's too old to run?
I think he represents. We shouldn't have. I don't think we should have 80-year-old leaders. Myself, But we can't. We have to have a generational change. I think they represent McConnell, these guys, even Trump. They represent a generation that we got to move past, and they serve their country well. I love Joe Biden. Like he served his country. He's a great human. He's just a great guy, And to watch him get hit in social media, he's a great human being. He's a great person. He served this country well. He displaced Donald Trump. There's nothing bigger he could do for the country than to get rid of that cancer. So he served, and he has these issues that he passed. he has a good legacy. He created a new industrial policy in the United States around the economy of the future. That should be honored, you know? And I think he probably could have a better year and a half, 2 years if he said he wasn't running, and let's get the country going. Let's start healing and not get right back into another fight.
Not to play the name game, but who would you support? You have said, I think, that you're not gonna run.
No, I'm not running. I don't know. The best part about this is like run, like let a bunch of people get in and go to New Hampshire and go to South Carolina and like get in an argument about what the future of the Democratic Party looks like. I think that would be great. I mean, I'm an old sports guy. Let's get a competition going. You know, I mean, when I played sports, it'd be like, yeah, you're the starting quarterback this week. This guy's right behind you, breathing down your neck, so you better come to practice, you better show up. You know, that competition is a good thing, and I think we should create that and say, look, get out there. Who's got the new ideas in the Democratic Party? And how are we going to be better than them? And in a lot of ways, I think it would be great because it's going to be the anti-woke mob in DeSantis and that crew. That's going to be the entire conversation in the Republican primary. Great opportunity for Democrats to come in and say, we're going to heal veterans with psilocybin. We're going to cure addiction with cannabinoids and CBD and all of this stuff. We're going to go hard into our schools with trauma-informed care and mental health coverage. We're going to try to bend the curve on the industrial food system and move to regenerative agriculture, all in on technologies to curb climate capture, create a bunch of jobs, increase union membership, and build America. Versus roadkill or whatever DeSantis was saying. Like, what's more attractive to people? Like, who would be more inspiring in that scenario? I think the person with the vision for the country would be.
But when I have these conversations with some folks, it's hard to come up with the names of people.
We are suffering from having leaders in place for a long time in the Democratic Party. And I think it's starting to change with Hakeem Jeffries and the leadership team that came through the House. But that's been kind of a problem. I mean, people would sit around and they couldn't move up, and so they left, and so we lost some of our bench, I think, in some of those.
One of the stories that's been in the news the last few days is East Palestine in your state. Can you tell me what your opinion is about how the Biden administration has handled this toxic train wreck?
It's an absolute tragedy, and I don't live far from there, to like 30 miles, so we're all concerned about our water. And I literally flew here from the Pittsburgh airport, and so I had people live in eastern Ohio, and they drive over to the airport to work, and I talked to a couple people at the airport today, and they're scared that they drove through this one day, and smelled, the explosion. And one lady said, like, I'm going to worry the rest of my life that this shoe may drop in my life because of this accident. And you're not going to know for a while. And so it's tragic. There's not a ton you can do. Like, it's an accident. It's a tragedy. I wish there was a presence quicker there from the administration. I was glad to see.
Was that because the governor didn't ask the administration to come in sooner?
I mean, maybe, but honestly, like, who gives a crap?
Right.
Like, and I'm just saying crap because the cameras are on and I'm trying to be polite down here in the South, Y'all are got better manners than we do in Ohio,
Yeah.
so. But, like, just show up. Like, it doesn't matter who voted for who, and I'm not saying that was a reason, but, like, just go, show up, water, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, like, feed people, be there for them, because it's just a heartbreaking thing, and for people to feel like they're not cared about. And the issue really is that this is a community and an area of the state and country that has longly felt neglected. This is where NAFTA came in and took all the jobs away, and like they went to Mexico, and Workers in our area had to go to Mexico and literally train workers who were going to take their jobs. The steel mills closed, the auto plants, automation, globalization. Nobody cared. Like, nobody cared. And I get the comparative advantage, and with capital's got to flow and all that, all the economics of it, I get it. But then there was no response to these folks who really got hurt, and then it became addiction, and then it became heroin, and now it's fentanyl, and it's like the deaths of despair and the mental health issues, like that all, and then this happens and then no one shows up. How would you feel? You'd be pissed too. Be like, nobody cares. And you heard the mayor, and it became a little too political, and then Trump showed up, what's he going to do? He's going to pass out water. I mean, it's ridiculous to try to politicize it and score political points off it. Yeah, do I think the administration should have showed up earlier? 100%. Do I think Trump should have showed up? No. And then Rudy freaking Giuliani shows up? Like, what's this guy going to do? He's going to only make matters worse. That's the kind of, what are you doing here? Stop. Get out. Just get out of here.
Can you talk about what January 6th means to you now?
It's low point. Absolute low point. And I chaired the appropriations subcommittee that funded the legislative branch, so the Library of Congress, the Capitol Police. That was my kind of gig for a few years, and got to know the Capitol Police very, very well. And to watch that happen was just absolutely heartbreaking. And then to watch the response from the Republicans, not all of them, there were 35 of them that kind of stood out and voted for an investigation in an official House committee to investigate it. And I think those members showed great courage. But to watch it get politicized, to watch it get swept under the rug, diminished the service of those cops coming from a party that says, back the blue. And then you saw when they were getting their awards that they didn't shake McConnell's hand or McCarthy's hand. That's how those guys feel. They work very long hours, 6-7 days a week. They don't make a lot of money. They don't make nearly as much as cops do in Southern Maryland or Northern Virginia. They're there because they care about the country. They care about protecting members of Congress. And to be on the front lines of that and to be absolutely dismissed, betrayed, was an absolute low point in the history of the country. And to think that somehow doesn't matter anymore. We're to the point where it doesn't matter. And we all, share the stories of Richard Nixon. It was the Republicans who went to Nixon. That's why Nixon resigned. It wasn't the Democrats. It was the Republicans. And I will tell you, I served with Nancy Pelosi for 20 years. If a Democrat did anything remotely like Donald Trump did, or there was any scenario like that, she would have ripped somebody. There would be a price to pay. You had ethical responsibilities, you had moral responsibilities that were not to be questioned. You'd have your differences on policies and all that. That was bigger than that. And the fact that huge thing got thrown into the mix with all the BS that's talked about in D.C. is really low point.
A number of congressmen and former congressmen and women have talked about having to run every 2 years and the cycle that you go through and the difficulty that once you win your election, you're back hitting the road again, raising money. Yeah. It's almost not enough time to even spend on your job. Can you elaborate on that?
It's a absolutely broken system. I mean, you think about, 2 years in 1789 versus 2 years today and the system that's set up, the pace of things that are happening. I think this particular thing needs to be part of a reform agenda. I was fairly lucky because I had a fairly safe district. Wasn't super safe, but...
By the way, your district essentially doesn't exist anymore,
No,
right?
It's now like five separate districts. But much like you guys have dealt with here with gerrymandering, sad to see Jim Cooper, who's a very good friend of mine, lose his seat here. But it needs to be part of a modernization effort in the country. And I think a modernization effort, and I'd like to see what we can do in Ohio too, is like ranked choice voting, automatic voter registration. I think you can have you can extend the congressional terms to 4 years for the House. The problem has always been senators don't want members of Congress in their congressional delegation to be able to run for the Senate like in a midterm where it'd be safe because they have a 4-year term, so they wouldn't lose their seat and they could take shots at senators all the time and go back to Congress if they lose. So the senators are very against this. But I think you could probably make some provision that you can only run for one federal office at a time. Like, let's figure it out. Like 4 years for the House, 6 years for the Senate. Let people breathe and be able to actually participate in solving these big problems. So how do you make that part of a larger, reform agenda that I think most people in the country are waiting for? And to get elected and sworn in January and turn around in like February and you're calling donors and it just doesn't make sense to anybody. And that's what I told the kids today in the class. Like they really have their work cut out for them. And like we need this generation to step up, heal this country, be reform-minded, participate in the reconciliation and the stuff I mentioned in my concession speech.
Yeah. Some of the things you said in that concession speech remind me how difficult it is to run for office and how difficult it is to concede. And you did it graciously. You made a real point of conceding and why it's important for politicians who lose to concede and accept the results. And yet we have a country where many people don't believe the results. How do you fix that?
Do we have any alcohol here? We can got Tennessee whiskey. we could take a shot at it. Again, this gets caught up in the misinformation and the lack of trust. I mean, Ohio, we have every county has a board. I don't know what it's like here, but every county has a board of elections. And there are 4 members, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. The entire staff within the Board of Elections is half and half Democrat, half Republican. It's like, on what planet are you living on if you think there's this grand conspiracy where all these people are like running this con and there's no one that's going to say anything? You're literally, it's inherent in the system of, checks and balances. And so the only thing that I can think of is that there's no trust. There's no trust. I mean, most people really feel like this country has sold them out. And you look at the job loss over the last 30 or 40 years, talked about East Palestine with nobody caring about these communities. And there's a lot more than just Youngstown, Ohio. I mean, it's 70% of the country, if not more, that feel, largely forgotten. And then there was, the trade agreements and stuff. And like I said, it's not that you did the trade agreements, it's that you didn't address the downside of the trade agreements to the communities that were affected by it. Then the subprime mortgage crisis happened. Nobody went to prison. Like the entire economy collapsed. And people lost their homes. And nobody went to jail, got swept under the rug. So now this is 2 big blows over 20 plus years. Like, okay. And both of those happened under Democratic presidents. And so you're sitting there thinking, and then here comes Donald Trump. Give this guy a shot. What do I have to lose? Kind of thing. And Trump even said that, what do you got to lose? And so I just think that it gets back to that issue of trust. And if you don't have trust between the leader, and it could be in a church, it could be in a business, it could be on a football team, if the people don't trust the leaders, it's not going to work.
You've had a busy day at Vanderbilt, and
had a ball here, by the way. You got great kids here.
Yeah,
unbelievable. I really enjoyed it.
I think you did John Meacham and Dean Gear's class and another class as well. What did you hear from students or questions from students that surprised you, struck you?
I was really, and I was talking to the chancellor earlier about it. Like the level of, I knew kids in Vanderbilt were going to be smart, I mean, not as smart as people who graduate from Bowling Green State University in Ohio, but, can't compete with that. But I was really impressed with the level of emotional intelligence that the kids here have. Like, their questions were insightful. They weren't like just heady. They were like really insightful. And I just, kind of across the board in both classes today, and I was just really, really impressed at the depth of understanding and the wanting to know. But it really stood out to me that these kids are emotionally intelligent, which is really what we need now. Like, there's a great book called The Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman. He's a rabbi, passed away writing this book, and his whole concept of the book about leadership was that nerve and guts are most important to leadership. Not another data point. The chancellor knows this. It's not like, get one more, and we just think, I'm going to get one more data point, I'm going to get one more article, and then I'm going to make. No, leadership is about here and here. This comes last. And I think these kids that you're producing here, like, you could kind of feel that kind of understanding that this is about more than just the 10-point plan, and that makes me feel optimistic.
Yeah, we asked people to write down some questions they might have for you, and one of them is, what do you believe the role of loneliness or lack of community is in or misinformation?
Yeah, I think we touched upon it a little bit. The idea of loneliness, and this is these are the conversations that we really need to have. And it's like, oh, we're going to have this soft conversation about loneliness. Yes, we are, because we have to. One of the underlying, I think, fundamental problems we have in our society now is disconnection. We are disconnected. We think, because we have this beast, that we're connected. And in some ways, of course, we are. Sitting in a class today, and they're typing and like pulling up my record. I was scared to death. I was like, she's going to call me out on something that I said in 1997. But it's disconnection. We are disconnected from each other. We are disconnected from nature. We are disconnected from what is deepest inside ourselves, because of the distraction. And C.S. Lewis wrote a little riff in one of his books about if the devil was going to take over the world, he would make a world of noise. Just be so much noise that he would be able to come in and take over. And I think about that a lot. That all that noise has led to disconnection, the fear of missing out, the fear of other people's opinion. Like, you're not connected enough to who you are and what you believe. You're not connected enough to your friends or your family or your social network. And then look at what that converts into. Deaths of despair in some form or fashion. Addiction, overdose, suicide, teen suicide, the level of disconnection with our kids, the mental health issues that we have. That all can get back to disconnection. And so, and we talked about this earlier, a few days ago, like, we've got to understand that politics is downstream of culture. You can't just register people to vote and think they're going to vote if they don't feel connected to the broader community that they're a part of. They vote because they feel connected, and so I'm so impressed with your chancellor here, but our conversation that we had a couple hours ago was about the culture here in Vanderbilt and Nashville. You got art, you got music, you got sports, right? You've got a community here at Vanderbilt. This is like a little incubator of like what you need to, but the problem is we have that in Columbus, Ohio too. But we don't have that up and down the Ohio River. We don't have that in the old industrial towns. Nobody funds the arts. The theater that the Warner Brothers put up in 1940 whatever was empty. Right? And then when you knock it down, like, there's no art community. And there's, and the art programs in the schools get cut, right? No one's investing in the downtown, and the river's dirty. It's like, how are you going to build community to strengthen the culture? And just say this, because you think about this in the context of the greatest generation. Here's a generation of Americans absolutely seared together with each other, right? Through the Depression, through the war. Boys went off to war, women went in the factories with Rosie the Riveter. In this thing together for years and years and years, and struggle and death and suffering. Everybody lost somebody, and the people came back, VFWs, cemeteries, parades, like it was a community of people. What came from that, right? What policies flowed from that? Medicare, Medicaid, eventually civil rights happened, the Great Society. It was about being together. It was so together that whether you were a Republican or a Democrat, Nixon signed the EPA into law. Nixon signed community development block grants into law because it was about how do we build these communities up. And then we started to fray, and we are losing our culture. And so nothing good is going to flow from a poisonous culture that we have. You're not going to get great policies out of that. And there's the business saying of like culture eats strategy for breakfast. I forget which one, it's popular in the business schools. Culture eats policy for breakfast. You can't get a good policy if you don't have a good culture. And that's why the work here at the Vanderbilt Unity Project is so essential to knitting the culture back together.
Given the media's poor reputation for characterizing there you
Present
go.
company
There's somebody in the, always. For characterizing misinformation, example, WMDs in Iraq, the origin of COVID-19, the Hunter Biden laptop, who do you think should be the gatekeeper for what is not misinformation?
I think that, all due respect to the question, I think thinking that there's going to be one gatekeeper again, there's going to be one Walter Cronkite again is a recipe for failure. The key's got to be how do we educate our citizens again? Really, when you read Thomas Jefferson and some of the founding fathers about public education, it was not about innovation and entrepreneurship and all this stuff. It was about being good citizens. That's why we had public education, was to be a good, well-rounded, educated citizen. And I think we've got to go all in on civics education. We've got to go all in on speech and debate and conflict resolution. I love the idea of social and emotional learning. I've been a big fan and promoted it in my time in Congress, where you can learn how to handle conflict, raise our emotional intelligence. That's really what we're missing here. We're Americans. We got the innovation thing down. We've got the entrepreneurship thing down. We've got the research thing down. We're best in the world in these areas. Problem is our emotional intelligence and our ability to participate in a civic discourse in a rational way. And part of this is economic too, because those of you who understand how the brain works, like your brain can go into fight or flight mode. And when you go into fight or flight mode, you literally cut off your prefrontal cortex, which is your executive functions, where you have reasoning abilities, where you control your attention span, where you can problem solve, working memory, all here. And when this is cranked up, you're just in survival mode. And we have a country now that's in survival mode. And so you talk about the misinformation. Like if you're worried about survival, then your brain literally is not functioning at a peak level, which is why you need trauma-informed care in the schools to make sure our kids aren't living in that space. So many of them are because of adverse childhood experiences and other things. So how do we get the temperature down? I think it's got to start in public education. It's got to start with things like this and like knitting the community back together.
Tell this crowd what you're doing now. What are you spending your time on?
I get to talk to people like you now, like unencumbered. I'm doing some work in the natural gas industry. Along with renewable energy, I'm in a couple of advocacy groups, think tanks, that my goal is to really participate in building an American energy strategy that that is sustainable for the next 30 or 40 years, that can address our climate needs. And so I believe that natural gas is really the way for us to like build a model paired with renewables. Wind and solar aren't quite there to do it, but we still have large swaths of the world are burning coal. And so we've got to have a pragmatic solution to that isn't like we're going to fight for another 10 years because the clock is ticking. So natural gas, people don't really realize this, but from 2005 to 2019, the country who reduced carbon the most was the United States of America, because natural gas displaced coal. And so now you have China is building a coal-fired power plant, one a week. You have France is using more coal today than they were ever before. Germany's moving back to coal because they took nuclear offline. Indonesia, India, Vietnam, all of these countries. Wisconsin, 42% of Wisconsin's energy is coal. So my idea is, like, how do we promote natural gas to diminish coal as we build out renewable, hydrogen, some of these other opportunities? And so I'm basically doing things that are an extension of what I did when I was in Congress, working in some medical cannabis space around addiction and those kind of things, working with a company that has really cool technologies around bending the curve on climate, reducing carbon, things like that, and working with the unions that I love so much.
At the Unity Project, we ask the guests a couple of final questions. And one of them is, what gives you hope in this country?
Students at Vanderbilt. That's no shit. Like, I was really, really impressed today. Like, I did this not to create a competition, but I was at the Institute of Politics over in Chicago with David Axelrod a month or so back. And I just, man, it's been so good for me. Like, you guys, like, I know I come here so you can listen to me, but I drew a lot of hope and inspiration from the young people today. I think they're big-hearted. They want to solve problems. We have to engage them in honest, thoughtful discussions, and I think create, like, I was telling one of the classes today, I'm going to be 50 and I've spent my life in politics. I kind of feel like, I don't know if I'll ever run again or not, but I kind of feel like I'm kind of handing the baton to these kids, and I want them to feel like we're here to help you solve these problems. Like, my generation, we want to help you do this, and you should feel comfortable, and you should get involved, and they respond to it. It's really a beautiful thing.
And how can we start to heal the divisions in this country?
By really seeing the root cause of problems. I'm a huge believer in, like, what's the root cause? Let's not put a Band-Aid on it. Let's not address the symptoms. What's the root cause? The root cause in our society today, I believe, are really two things, and they overlap. One is trauma. You can pretend it's not there. It's there. It's abuse, neglect, economic. You look at adverse childhood experiences among kids. There's this huge study over decades. ACEs, they're called, adverse childhood experiences. If you have one, you can predict. They have thousands of kids. You can predict the bad habits or problems that person will have. If you have one, you can have a couple issues. It could be death, economic trauma, divorce, domestic abuse, whatever. You have two, chances are getting pretty good. You may end up in prison, criminal justice system. You get to 3 or 4, almost irreversible. And that is trauma. And then paired with that is the disconnection. I think those are the two root causes of almost all of our problems, that you can draw back to those two. And so I think a renewed commitment to the government that I don't believe can solve all of our problems, not even close, but to having a renewed idea of, like, these are the two underlying problems that if we don't fix it, we're going to be dealing with this 10 years from now. So how do we create programs that are innovative, that actually solve problems? Because I think that's part of the frustration with most Americans is, like, most people, honest to God, like most rich people that I've met, most, there's some that are semi-obnoxious, but most say, I don't mind paying my fair share of taxes, but I don't want to dump it into a system that is broken. So I would like to see the Democratic Party be the party of reform so that we can say, we agree with you. Almost run like a superintendent of a school district. Say, well, we're not going to come to you for a tax increase and rate levy increase, but here's what we're going to do. And I'm going to fix this and fix that and fix that. And then you go to the taxpayer and you say, look, we're doing these reforms. We need some more money in order to take this to the next level. I think if we thought about that, kind of had that viewpoint in Washington, I think it could be really interesting. But the short answer to your question is trauma and disconnection. And everything that we should do from the public side and the private side and the NGO side and the nonprofit side should be, how do we partner to reduce these two things?
Well, it's been a real pleasure to get to talk to you tonight, and I just want to say this. I think it's a loss to the country that you're no longer in Congress, but and I thank you for your service for 20 years to this country, but it's clear we have not lost Tim Ryan's voice, and it will continue loud and clear, I'm sure, for many, many years. Thank Tim for coming to us.